Hey guys, just a quick disclaimer. I have a few takes in this video that might feel like hot takes. I really do encourage you to watch the video in its entirety to the end because I try and substantiate these a fair bit. And also I think some of my best interpretation and analysis of the show comes in the last couple of minutes. So yeah, please do watch the full video if you can.
Hello everyone, look, I know that Apple TV only has like 4 memberships. No one seems to watch Apple TV shows, but I made a video talking about Disclaimer and how it was one of the best shows on TV, and a few people checked it out because of me, and a few people are dying to know what I think of the ending. So this video is probably not going to get too many views. This is one straight up for the fans. Let's talk about the ending of Disclaimer. All right, I'm going to be covering the full season spoiler talk. I'm just going to get into it. I'll give a very quick rundown if you want to be able to watch the video and haven't seen the show, but this is really for people that have seen the show. I'm just going to get into it. So quick run through of the plot of Disclaimer, right? Kate Blanchett is given a book that brings up this very awful secret that she has of her past. It is given around to her husband and her son, and she doesn't want them to read the book. Even though it is fiction, it is very clearly about her. She doesn't want her secrets being exposed. The secret ends up being that she had an affair with a barely legal young boy who then drowned. And then the series reveals that she actually let him drown, saving her child. She saw him out there saving her child and he drowned. You know, saving Kate Blanchett's child. So Kate Blanchett has a lot of guilt about this. This is how it is presented to us throughout the show. Then on top of that, not only is the book delivered to her husband, but a bunch of steamy photos that were taken during their affair of her is given to the husband. The husband is furious. He goes, I can't believe you cheated on me. Don't talk to me. You're out of my house, yada, 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 right? So her life is in complete shambles, and it's all at the hands of the father of the boy that she let drown, right? So he's walking around blowing up her life, giving this book to everyone that's important to her, basically spelling out, hey, look what Kate Blanchett did to my child. And the whole show, you're sitting there being like, what a nasty woman. When it acts out this sequence where the boy drowns and Kate Blanchett watches from a distance after getting her son back and he just drowns, you're pissed at her. You're like, okay, I felt bad for you at the start of the show, even though you cheated. I felt really bad for how your husband was that upset at you and didn't hear you out. But then when you see what she did, you're like, not a fan of you, Kate Blanchett. That was really naughty. However, then the last episode comes, and this is an opportunity for me to vent about trigger warnings yet again, all right? Because look, I understand the importance of trigger warnings. In my opinion, the ideal situation is similar to how books have QR codes if you are a sensitive reader and then you can check what's in it. I think we should have a system where any show you're about to watch, you can quickly go on a website, quickly Google, and check if it has certain triggers for you. What I don't love is before every episode, having a trigger warning of what is going to be in the show or the episode. Because throughout the season of Disclaimer, there is a trigger warning at the start. And I do understand the importance of trigger warnings, but unfortunately, if you are perceptive, it then gives away the show, right? Because throughout this show, it kept saying there are scenes of sexual violence. And I was sitting there at the end of episode 6 where she's having the face off with the father, right? And she's had her drink and she goes, let me tell you what really happened. And then I remember, every episode has had a warning about sexual violence. I assume what has happened is they've assumed it was an affair and the son actually sexually assaulted her. So unfortunately, I did kind of guess it as the video started. In saying that though, the presentation, the way this sequence is done, her harrowing retelling of this story in the final episode, the reveal, I also must commend the show for 6 hours committing to the idea that Kate Blanchett did this awful thing with no real motivation except for keeping her affair a secret from her husband and then pulling the rug from under you. Even though I kind of guessed it moments before it happened, it was still really interesting. I was like, man, this show would be really interesting to rewatch. But yeah, this whole sequence where Kate Blanchett is talking to the father of the child she let drown, and she goes, you know what? I did let that fucker drown. Here's why. I thought the sequence was so well handled too. I know there's a lot of discourse about how these sort of scenes are handled, whether they feel voyeuristic or rather leery. I think this was perfectly executed. It was uncomfortable. It was distressing. It went for a long time, but not in a way that felt, again, leery or pervy or exploitative. It was really well executed, and I thought the son does a really good double performance, right? Because in the initial way he is presented, he comes off full of life and really sweet and youthful and kind of hot. And it's interesting because in the first review, I talked about the fact that they almost sold you on the affair. You kind of got why it was exciting for both of them. They made it look awesome. But then it's revealed that this is just a creative interpretation that the author of the book came up with, right? This isn't actually how it happened. This is like a glamorized version. And then we see Cate Blanchett's version, and it's horrible and awful and disgusting. And I just think the way both versions are presented in these like long, unbroken takes is so well done. Like, can I just say, like, I think it's really well done that, like, when you're seeing the book kind of like visualized, it looks too good to be true. It looks like this awesome affair, and she looks like this like sultry kind of like harlot that like corrupted her boy. And then when you see, you know, this version, you're like, oh my fucking God, right? Awesome. I also love that this like unhinged dad of the boy who's been wearing his son's deodorant and like acting like a superhero the whole show refuses to believe it. Now, I do want to ask, would you guys have found the story more confronting, interesting, effective if he had still gone and killed Cate Blanchett's son out of revenge? Because I was sitting there when he was about to inject the Drano out of revenge for what she did to his son, even knowing that his son had assaulted her. I was like, oh, if they do this and she just misses it, like what an insane ending. Now, they didn't do that. Hi guys, just while I've got you, I do memberships for this channel. I would love if you could consider getting one. It really helps out the channel and helps me grow. What's included in the membership is once a week I am doing a sort of book club where I'm talking about a TV show. Currently, I'm covering Tell Me Lies season 1. I'm covering an episode a week. After that, I'll let members vote on which show I cover next. On top of that, every 3 to 4 weeks, I also do a quick podcast talking about everything I've seen and watched that I don't have time to do full videos on. So you basically get my thoughts on everything I've seen and watched. This is all for a small cost and it really helps the channel. If this sounds interesting to you at all, please consider getting a membership. Thank you so much, and back to the video. I do need to talk about one scene that kind of caught me off guard at the end of Disclaimer though, which kind of caught me off guard because at first I was like, oh wow, what a profound thing to say. And then I thought about it for 10 seconds and went, actually no. Now this is the scene between Robert, all right, Cate Blanchett's husband, where he's saying to her after learning the truth of what actually happened to her, he says, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You know, I'm so sorry for how I've behaved. I'm so sorry. Why didn't you tell me?
So sorry. I can't even begin to imagine the horror they went through back then. Stupid. Never forgive myself, Kat. Why did you never tell me? Photographs came into our life. Why wouldn't you just tell me that?
I didn't know where to start. I needed help to pick the pieces apart. And betrayed and, disgusted and all those things I feared you would be.
So sorry, I've been so angry at you when I really should have been feeling bad for you. And this conversation ends with Cate Blanchett saying, you know what, I don't think I can forgive you for the fact that you were more bothered, more emotionally upset about the idea that I had cheated, right? I had pleasure with someone rather than the idea that I had been assaulted.
Okay, please forgive me.
I know I should forgive you, but the truth is I can't, because you're managing the idea of me having been violated by someone far more easily than the idea of that someone bringing me pleasure.
And you know what? Initially I was like, wow, what a profound thing to say. And that's true, right? He was clearly more angry. And then I thought about it for a second. I'm like, nah, that's a cruel shit test, man. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I do understand if he seemed genuinely unfazed, but I thought he had a pretty appropriate response to an extent in both situations. I did think he was a little dramatic with the cheating and should have heard her out more. But I don't know, man. Like, if this was like gender swapped or something and someone went up to a wife and gave, really saucy photos and a book basically saying, yeah, like your husband fucked around, here's photos that are basically meant to look like proof. And then the wife was like, how could you do this to me? You've ruined our family, yada, yada, yada. I think we would all understand where the wife was coming from. But I think in my opinion, I thought Robert had an appropriate response. Like, did she want him to go, I'm going to kill that fucking boy? Like, the boy's already dead. And also on top of that, I think if he got up and got really angry and really upset, it's almost making it about him. I think him showing genuine remorse for how he acted is kind of the fair response. Now, in saying that, I get what this scene is going for. I do completely understand that there is actually a complex with male ownership, and there is actually something interesting to say about a lot of men would prefer a woman to be assaulted rather than her cheat.
It's almost like you're relieved that I was raped.
But at the same time, while that is an interesting thing to explore about humanity and can probably extend to all genders, right? Not just men, I think at the same time, there is a difference, right? Because one is a promise you make to someone, right? Like, we are going to be faithful to each other. So on a personal level, like, your partner being assaulted does feel like less of a personal attack towards you and instead something that you now need to both process and go through with a more kind of somber tone. So to me, the fact that he was angry about cheating and more sad and subdued about her assault makes sense to me. I get what she was saying, and I think a better point that could have been made is the fact that, like, this is the most passion I've seen from you in our entire marriage. This is the most I've seen you care, is when you thought I cheated. You never seem interested in what I have to say. You never seem interested in having sex with me, but then you got really upset at the idea I cheated. Like, can you imagine? I feel like the better writing would have been if, like, hey, this was the most passion and vigor you showed in our relationship. I've never seen you care about me as much as you cared about the idea that I'd slept with someone else. You know, the idea that you didn't have complete ownership of me. I think that would have worked better because, yeah, on my end, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I was like, I get what you're going for. It's a really interesting idea that, like, men would rather women, you know, suffer than do something awful to them. That's an interesting idea, but I don't think the example here fully checks out. And I thought Robert was relatively remorseful and genuinely sorry. But on top of that, he did actually go up to the father, right, and tell him off and berate him and say, like, how could you not know this about your son? And I actually do think that Cate Blanchett could have just yelled at Robert in episode 1 and be like, I was assaulted. I did not cheat. I was assaulted. Like, I get that, yes, he did talk over her and he was very angry, but no, to an extent, like, it did feel a bit strange that she didn't reveal it.
Like, I get maybe not revealing it in that initial big confrontation in episode 1 or 2, but there's a scene where they're, like, both by their son's bedside, I think, and, like, checking their phone, and, like, Robert's making a phone call. Definitely tell him then. Like, just yell and be like, I was assaulted. I have not cheated on you. We need to talk about this. I think Robert would have heard her out. The scene where she's telling him that they're not going to work out and they're going to separate because she can't forgive this, she also says at a certain point, like, you know, I was scared about the disgust and hatred you'd have towards me for being assaulted. But it's like, no, the disgust and hatred that he showed was because he thought you cheated. And I think his disposition and demeanor when he finds out that she was assaulted shows that he doesn't see her as this tarnished woman and, like, damaged goods, that he can't mentally get past the hurdle that someone else has been intimate with her against her will. Another example of this, right, is Robert goes up to the father of the boy and says, why didn't you question your son's intentions? Why didn't you question the story about your son? And he goes, the more important question is, why didn't you question what I was telling you about your wife? You were so willing to believe it.
Why didn't you question it? Why didn't you?
And it's like, I'm sorry, again, like, kind of an interesting idea, but really, he was given a book that was presented as fact, and then this dad came up to him and, like, convinced him of this story and gave photos that look like confirmation, look like proof. She admits herself that she was trying to act enthusiastic in these photos to survive. If anyone is given what looks like cold hard proof of an affair that are intimate photos where she clearly looks into what's going on, of course they're going to be like, oh my God, my wife cheated. I am so crushed. I am so hurt. Like, sorry, like, he's allowed to, like, the whole point of this show is that this kooky old man was trying to convince everyone in her life of the awful thing that she did, and it was kind of a convincing sales pitch. They believed it as well. Like, I'm sorry, I think the show is a bit harsh on Robert. On top of that, the son also believed it. The son, like, had a drug overdose because he was so mortified by what was being presented to him. So it's like, if she, like,
so I'm not victim blaming here. I don't think she necessarily did the wrong thing, but I kind of get why Robert would be confused as to, hey, like, why didn't you mention this when I was, like, yelling at you for cheating and had that initial chat with you? Like, I feel like if she just yelled over at him when he was like, oh, is this why we don't have sex anymore? And when I was assaulted, this is insulting, yada, yada, yada. A lot of problems could have been solved, but I guess then we wouldn't have a show. However, in saying all this, I'm actually rather not too critical with the show. It completely shifts the show in a really interesting direction, and I'm actually really curious to rewatch the show, whether I'll rewatch it and go, oh, she actually tried to say something and Robert was really unreasonable and didn't hear her out, and of course she couldn't say it then because yada, yada, yada. Like, I'm really actually dying to watch the show again and kind of look at her responses and go, oh, that's more of a trauma response rather than a response of like, oh, I've got a dirty little secret. It was really well done. It's a really good show. Do I agree with her divorcing Robert in that moment because he seems a bit more subdued than when he thought she cheated? Not really, but I would have preferred if we just got a scene or two more of them talking about their marriage and talk about the fact that, yeah, like this is the most passion you showed, or, you know, this is the most alive I'd seen you, or our marriage hasn't worked for a while. And, you know, the fact that I felt like I couldn't tell you that I was assaulted is the reason I'm ending it. Interesting. You know, that could have been great, but I just thought the way it was handled wasn't perfect. However, again, really interesting idea, especially the idea that she was going to have a child and they'd be struggling to have a child for a while, but she aborted it because she worried that it was the boys, right? And not Robert's. Really well done. I thought this was a really good show overall, and I'm dying to rewatch it again, knowing what I know. Like, you know, if I ever have free time, I'll definitely rewatch it, and maybe I'll change my hot takes. I will say one thing. Why did she not call the police when she woke up from being drugged and was rushing to the hospital? Like, in the moment I was watching it, like, oh my god, go. I was like, why didn't she call the police? You can make the argument that like maybe she didn't want her secrets coming to light. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that one. I feel like she could have called. And at that point, like, if your son's really that important, you'll take the risk. Like, just call. I will say though, despite my issues with that Robert conversation, I think this show does a really good job of showing how like a woman was assaulted and then she is then the problem, right? She is challenged and cornered and attacked at every single end. And I think it's really interesting that basically all her interactions with the parents of the boy are seen as calculated and nasty and cold and like rude to the parents of the boy that saved her child, even though now if you rewatch the show, it's seen as like these are just trauma responses. She doesn't want to think about the awful things that this boy did to her and, you know, reckon with the idea that this boy is also the one that saved their child. Like, I actually think all these conversation points are really, really fascinating. I think the show did a really good job of showing how, like, you know, this woman is suffering for what this awful boy did to her, right? This awful young man did to her for the rest of her life. Also, I really find it interesting, like, obviously Robert and her are both really confronted by the idea that like this guy that did these awful things to Kate Blanchett then went out and got the child, saved the child. Like, a super interesting idea. Like, what do you even do with that information? But on top of that, I also find it really fascinating that his actions saved one child, but also ensured another child was aborted, right? Like, isn't that kind of a fascinating idea? Like, she didn't know for sure whether it was Robert's or her child that was like growing in her belly. But in a way, he like, yeah, saved one child, and then his presence in her life also led to her having to abort the other one because she couldn't be sure. Like, just a really interesting idea. I really like this show. I did really like this show. I'm really curious to see what you guys think of my thoughts on that sort of Robert divorce thing, whether you feel that was fair or not. I'm open to a discussion about it. I don't think she's like an awful woman or a nasty woman. I think she's hurting, but I do wonder whether the show thought this was like rational or irrational decision making on her part. Thank you so much for watching and have a lovely day. Please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching.